event is coming soon.
The Astor bloodline, one of the 13 satanic bloodlines that rule the world. Based on Christian Illuminati researcher Fritz Springmeier's book Bloodlines of the Illuminati. The Astor family represents some of the wealthiest people in recent history, with their names stretching back to the 1720s. Their power and wealth are reflected in the numerous important landmarks in the New York area named after them. Notable family members include many generations of John Jacob Astor, including one who perished on the Titanic. The original founder of the Astor fortune was John Jacob Astor, 1763 to 1848. John Jacob Astor was born in Waldorf, Duchy of Baden, Germany, from a Jewish bloodline. The Jewish origins have been hidden, and quite a number of various ideas of the Astor's heritage have been put into circulation by the Astors. John Jacob Astor was a butcher in Waldorf. In 1784, he came to America after a stopover in London, England. Although the story is that he came to America penniless, and that may be true, he soon joined the Masonic Lodge, and within 2-3 years had become the master of the Holland Lodge No. 8 in Y City. This Holland Lodge is a prominent lodge in that many of its members have good connections to the Illuminati elite. An example of just one Lodge No. 8 member is Archibald Russell, 1811 to 1871, whose father was president of a real hotbed of Illuminati action for many years, the Royal Society of Edinburgh. By 1788, Astor was a master of Masonic Lodge No. 8. This is rather interesting considering Astor could not speak English when he arrived in America, and supposedly was very poor. John Jacob Astor was always very famous for being cold-hearted, antisocial, a man who didn't have charm, wit or grace. This quote comes even from a relative of the DuPont family who wrote a sympathetic biography entitled The Astor Family. If this man lacked social graces and was so cold, and was so poor during his first years in the U.S., why did he rise to such prominence in Freemasonry? Certainly not because of his social graces. For instance, one time later in life at a meal given for elites, when his hands got dirty at the table he reached over and used the shirt of the man beside him to wipe his hands. The original financial break came by carrying out a series of shady and crooked real estate deals in the NY City area. The next break came when two men who are now known to have been in the Illuminati gave John Jacob Astor a special government privilege. The two men were President Jefferson and Secretary Gallatin, both Illuminati members. The United States government had placed an embargo on all U.S. ships from sailing with goods in 1807. But Astor got special permission from these two men for his ship to sail with its cargo. His ship sailed and made close to a $200,000 profit in that day's money. Astor strangely profited greatly from the War of 1812. Which crippled almost all the other American shippers. Astor also worked together with George Clinton, another member of the Illuminati, on land deals. Even at that period in history, British intelligence worked for the Committee of 300 and for the 13 top families. It is interesting then, that John Coleman, who had access as an intelligence agent to secret documents, discovered that the original John Jacob Astor was also a British secret agent. The 13 families have very intimate roles with the American and British intelligence cults. Prior to 1817, John Jacob Astor entered into the fur trade and remained the biggest player in the fur trade until he got out of it in 1834. Over the years, he had managed to build up a monopoly. How he managed to push everyone else out is a good question. Bear in mind, white people had been trapping furs in the New World for several centuries, and the Indians for who knows how long. Then this guy Astor comes along and in a few years totally owns the whole industry. Again, this could only have happened because the occult power of this Astor family gave them the right. Obviously, others in the Committee of 300 had to step aside. If his position in the hierarchy had not given Astor the right, believe me, the other families that originally controlled the fur trade would have gotten rid of Astor. One result of his fur company was that Astoria, Oregon was created. Today, perhaps in honor of the family that originally took interest in it, Astoria is a real hotbed for the secret satanic covens in Oregon. John Jacob Astor did have a few helpful connections. 3 of his relatives were captains on clipper ships. He had connections in London to the Backhouse family. He married a Todd, a family frequently associated with Satanism. His wife, a Todd, was also connected to the influential Brevoort family. And finally, for some reason, John Jacob Astor was also on good relations with the politicians of the day, perhaps because most of them were Freemasons too. For a few years John Jacob Astor had participated in the opium trade, but in 1818 he publicly quit running opium to China. John Coleman, in his good book The Conspirators' Hierarchy, The Story of the Committee of 300, p. 131 notes, John Jacob Astor made a huge fortune out of the China opium trade. It was the Committee of 300 who chose who would be allowed to participate in the fabulously lucrative China opium trade, through its monopolistic baic, and the beneficiaries of their largesse remained forever wedded to the Committee of 300. Interestingly, another top 13 family, the Russ, was also one of the lucky ones to get a slice of the China opium trade. It is clear repeatedly from history that Astor was privy to inside information in the government, and maintained his own courier system. John Jacob Astor bought up large amounts of land in NY, which land greatly increased in value. The financial panic of 1837 allowed him to foreclose on a large number of mortgages. John Jacob Astor's wealth continued to skyrocket. As one biography said, when it came to a question of principle versus profit, Astor was a practical man. Put simply, he had no scruples. Astor had a reputation for being a ruthless landlord. He also had the reputation of not paying his legitimate debts. Astor became a banker, and sat on the board of 5 directors of the new national bank that Hamilton created for the U.S. government called the Bank of the United States. Astor owned a large block of the stock of the Bank of the United States. Astor also was fairly active during his life as a Freemason, holding several more key positions in the secret lodge life. John Jacob was the richest man in the United States. Note this reference. Myers, Gustavus. History of the Great American Fortunes. London, Stationers' Hall, 1909, p. 147 said. Statistics issued in 1844 of manufacturers in the United States showed a total gross amount of $307,196,844 invested. Astor's wealth, then, was 1/15 of the whole amount invested throughout the territory of the United States. Is having 1/15 of all of what American money is invested not rich? John Jacob Astor's descendants had a penchant for secrecy, and set up things to rule from behind the scenes. In contrast, to some of the other top families, the Astors preferred not to sit on boards of corporations they controlled. In 1890, a real estate expert calculated the Astors owned 1/20 of New York City real estate. After making their fortune while residing in the New York area, the Astors by and large have all gone to England. They still wield great financial power in the United States through proxies. Forum magazine, November 1889, commented that authorities estimated the Astors were worth $300,000, but that figure had to be an underestimate. Today, my estimate of the Astors is that they are worth about $40 billion. One of the many foundations that the Astors created was the Vincent Astor Foundation, which is controlled from England by the Astors and has in the range of $100 million tax-exempt dollars. The Vincent Astor Foundation has typically given to Catholic and Episcopalian needs, among other things. They also give money to agencies opposed to private ownership of guns. They give money to NY's public library. Imagine how much influence that gives them, when the library is receiving regular help for general support. A 1971 foundation directory stated that the V. Astor Foundation had its present emphasis on preventing juvenile delinquency. Why don't I trust the Astors in helping out with law enforcement? The William Waldorf Foundation states that its purpose is promotion of mutual understanding and the diffusion of knowledge and culture among the United States and the dominions, colonies, and countries of the British Commonwealth. This sounds very similar to the public statement of purpose that the Secret of Pilgrim Sock has given out to those who need something about them. Assets for this foundation are a mere $64,000. Vincent Astor, now deceased, was a member of 41 private clubs. To give an idea of how much power just one of the many Astor men wield, some of the businesses Vincent was involved include: Director, American Express Company, Deere; Atlantic Fruit and Sugar Company, Deere; Chase Manhattan Bank, of the Rockefellers, Deere; City and Suburban Homes Company, Deere; Classical Cinematograph Corporation, Deere; Cuban Dominican Sugar Company, Deere; Great Northern Railroad, Deere; Central Railroad, Deere; Inter; Mercantile Marine Company, Deere; National Park Bank of NY, Deere; NY County Trust Company, Deere; Weekly Publications Incorporated, Deere; Western Union Telegraph Trust NY; Zoological Sock, advisor to Bankers Trust of Nye, member AIMER; Museum of Net, HIST, member Net, Inst, of Sock Sciences. Notice these last two, like so many elite-controlled organizations, are heavily involved in the spread of the evolution theory. Just like the Rothschilds, DuPonts, and Rockefellers, the Astors always set one of their Astor males as the head of the entire family. This headship is passed down as a birthright within the different branches of the family, just as any king passes on his throne. On the corner of 33rd Street and 5th Avenue, the site later became the site of the Empire State Building. The original Waldorf Astoria Hotel was built by William Waldorf, et al. The hotel opened in March 1893. It is described as the ultimate in snob appeal. Later, two Astor cousins built the Astoria, another even taller elite hotel, in New York, which opened in 1897. Of course, like many of the other elite families, the Astors have their main property to get away and relax. In 1894, John Jacob wrote the novel A Journey in Other Worlds, where he describes a society which operates on the idea of conserving energy. Strange how the elite likes to promote conservation among us cattle. In the late 1800s, the Illuminati began to reconfigure its outward face. The higher levels started creating innocent-sounding cover organizations to hide their meetings behind. In 1901, the Astors contributed toward the creation of the Pilgrim Society, which was the cover organization for AIMER and Brit. 6 Degrees Princes of the Illuminati. I believe at least 5 Astors are now members of the Pilgrim Society. The Pilgrims had recently included David Astor, John Jacob Astor VIII, and William Waldorf Astor III. And during the 1970s, Baron Astor of Hever was the president of the London branch of the Pilgrims. This implies that Astor of Hever was at least the next level up in the chain of command. The Astors also have been very prominent in the group, which is Britain's equivalent to the Skull and Bones Sock. In Britain, the Astor, along with about 20 other families, dominate the group, just as certain families like the Whitneys in the U.S. help dominate the Order of Skull and Bones. Again, as was earlier pointed out, the key to understanding Satanism is the bloodlines. In 1910, the muscle and bone branches of the Illuminati reconfigured themselves with the creation of the Round Table groups in 1910. The Astors were the part of the financial backers behind the Round Table groups, along with Abe Bailey. Rhodes and Milner were key players in setting up the Society of the Elect, a super-secret top circle of Illuminati. Rhodes Trust, in part helped by the Astor, helps finance the Rhodes Scholarship system. Rhodes, a high-ranking Freemason, wanted the Masonic claptrap as part of these various new groups, but Milner and Brett did away with the Masonic rituals and costumes, etc. In 1919, the Royal Institute of International Affairs, RIIA, was created. And the Astors were the major financial backers of the RIIA, which functions as the 4 degrees cover of the Illuminati. For those who are new to this, the RIIA is the British equivalent to the Council on Foreign Relations, CFR, which takes a major role in the policy-making process in the U.S. Waldorf Astoria was appointed to the RIIA. just above the CFR/REA or Round Table groups, which were initially named by Cecil Rhodes as the Association of Helpers. Cecil Rhodes set up the Rhodes Scholarships to recruit and bring top men from several nations to Oxford to be initiated into the Illuminati and to learn about how to bring in a one-world government. So the initial selection into the Rhodes program, its degree of the Illum, is equivalent to the initiation into the Skull and Bones. In the picture you see how the Clivedonisters were intimately connected to the Rhodes Scholars. Rhodes Scholars frequently went to the Clivedon estate. By looking at the genealogy chart you can see how the family in London broke up into two powerful segments. One part centered around the Clivedon estate, another group became Barons the Astors of Hever, or the Heveristers for short. William Waldorf Astor owned the Pall Mall Gazette, the Observer, and the Pall Mall magazine. The London Times was largely controlled by the Astors, and since 1922 they have owned this major source of British news. The DuPonts and the Rockefellers also have some major businesses where they too own blatant large holdings. However, most of the wealth of the 13 top families is hidden so that the ties to who owns it are difficult to track. Hoyt Amidon has been a proxy for Vincent Astor and the other Astors. See membership list of Illuminati in this newsletter. The Astor family also used Owen Lattimore as their proxy for opium trade, who in turn used Laura Spelman, who was funded by the Institute for Pacific Relations, IPR. The LPR was the group that supervised the Illuminati's decision to allow Red China to share in the opium trade. The puppet strings behind big world events may not be seen by the public, but if we trace the origins of several big events we see the Astors helping pull strings. The IPR helped lay the groundwork for the Pearl Harbor attack. The Astors also were behind the appeasement policy in Europe which allowed Hitler to become a threat. The Astors were also involved in the temperance movement against alcoholic drink which was begun by the Women's Christian Temperance Union. The temperance movement was an elite-created movement just like today we have big issues like apartheid which are made up by them to keep us busy. Joseph Kennedy and Onassis, two other top 13 Illuminati families, got rich off of the temperance movement by bootlegging. So many people have exposed the temperance movement, see Occult Theocracy for just one expose of Freemasonry's involvement, that it is not pertinent to cover it here. Today's equivalent of the temperance movement is the drug war. Colonel Jack Astor, one of the world's most powerful men, was among those who went down with the Titanic. To his honor, he didn't have to sacrifice his life, but did. If he had been a scoundrel he could have chased a woman and her children from some lifeboat. Many sermons have been preached on the significance of the Titanic, and I personally am beginning to feel that God laid it on the hearts of so many of his ministers to understand that the Titanic was a judgment upon the pride of the world. More specifically, it was a warning to the New World Order's elite. Another Illuminati invention was communism. This has been so thoroughly documented I don't know why I have to state it here, except that there are still people who haven't taken the time to study it out. James II. Billington's book Fire in the Minds of Men, a very scholarly work, and Occult Theocracy are some good starting points to study this. The Fabian Society was also connected to the Illuminati. For instance, Illuminati Prince Professor George Edward Gordon Catlin, Pilgrim Sock. Was a member of the Fabian Society's executive committee. The Fabian logo is a wolf in sheep's clothing. Fabians like H.G. Wells, who wrote so eloquently on the New World Order with such books as The New World Order, A Modern Utopia, The Open Conspiracy Blueprints for a World Revolution, was a wolf in sheep clothing. H.G. Wells made the New World Order something that sounded advantageous to everyone. A utopia of sorts. That is not what it will be. During the 1930s, the Fabian Socialists created the Political and Economic Planning Group, PEP. Mason Viscount Waldorf Astoria was a leader of PEP, a confidential program that the PEP created and implemented through the British government was later described in a book, Principles of Economic Planning, in 1935. The book doesn't explain why its cover has a obstentious Masonic square and compass displayed on its cover. George Bernard Shaw, who was a communist, and Fabian Socialist was the best friend of Lady Nancy Astor, who became the first woman member of Parliament. These two spend vast amounts of time together, much more than Nancy did with her husband Waldorf, who she didn't care to be around. Waldorf was the Mason that was mentioned earlier who helped lead PEP. After Nancy Astor was elected, or selected by the elite, to be the First Lady MP, one of the Russell ladies soon afterwards also became an MP. Communism pretends it is the enemy of the rich capitalists, but both the rich elite and the communist leaders are committed to wipe out Christianity, to wipe out free trade with monopolies, and to set up an Illuminati one-world government. Do you see they have similar goals? A picture is included of Waldorf and Nancy Astor's visit to Russia during the 1930s. The Astors were not treated like enemies but like royalty. Can we see how the elite-controlled press have deceived us? Do not trust our Illuminati-controlled elite to protect us from communism. They control communism. Besides socialism, Nancy Astor was a big supporter of Christian Science. Christian Science was a front for witchcraft from its very beginning. For more information on what Christian Science is about, I suggest people study Be Wise as Serpents, Chapter 2.6 The Healing Light. Nancy Astor wrote The Natural History of the Vampire in a book on the early Mason, communist Bakunin. She used Grenfell family papers. The Grenfell family were close friends to the Cliveden Astors. David Astor, the Honorable, attended Bilderberger meetings in 1957 and 1966. Alpha Lodge is the lodge in England that is traditionally for royalty. There are other elite lodges too, where those of the elite can protect themselves from rubbing shoulders with those of less social stature. These are the type of Masonic lodges that the Astors join. In summary, an examination of the Astor family reveals their close connections with the full spectrum of Illuminati activities ranging from Freemasonry, the Illuminati itself, the Pilgrim Society, the Round Tables, communism, Fabian Socialism, CFR, RIA, the Bilderbergers, as well as the various politically, that is Illuminati, tainted banks such as Chase Manhattan. Ava Alice Muriel Astor was an occultist. She was born in 1902, was pretty but also a very serious woman. She was a very strong-willed person that was able to dominate a person in her presence unless they were also strong-willed. She was into Egyptian magic and believed she was the reincarnation of an Egyptian princess and a disciple of Ignited. Alice Astor may have been one of the first people to enter King Tut's tomb, where she got herself a necklace. Aldous Huxley wrote Brave New World as a picture of things that were to come. Most people think as a expose, but it was really more as a plan or blueprint. Aldous Huxley and Alice did a great deal of occult things together. Their financial power is unchecked. Myers and others have noted the Astors are above the law. The top 13 families don't obey the law, they are the law. The Astors may have Illuminati kings and princes in their ranks, they may have dozens of billions of assets, yet it will all be nothing when they face their Creator at judgment. Follow up on the Astors. One of the items that I felt I should have given the readers back in the January 1, 1993 issue was the Masonic background of John Jacob Astor, 1763 to 1848. For the record, here is his Masonic involvement. Master of the Holland Lodge No. 8, of NYC 1788. Grand Treasurer of the Grand Lodge of New York 1796 to 1801. Junior Grand Warden on 2 occasions 1796 and 1801. Secretary of the Commandery, then called Encampments. For a busy man, he kept himself busy in his Masonic work. The Astor family revisited. With information on their Chandler branch, there are 13 top bloodlines. 13 families or bloodlines are at the top, and 5 of these families are the inside core of these 13. Prior to Be Wise as Serpents, the existence of 13 top families was not known by very many people. The existence of the 13 families had come out in Barry Smith's book Final Notice in the 1980s, but the names were still unknown. Barry Smith of Australia wrote in his book Final Notice p. 9. There are 13 families or groups heading up the world government plan. These families are portrayed as the 13 layers of blocks found on the strange seal on the reverse side of the US $1 bill. In a Little Read article, one SRA victim recently wrote that Satanism was controlled by a few families. Recently, one of the DuPonts was on a television show because the DuPonts were trying to kidnap him because they didn't like his support for the book Dope Incorporated. I was able to get a copy of the book, and was overjoyed to find such an excellent book. My sources have been telling me that the top Illuminati families were behind the drug trade. Yes, Satan's top followers are also the kingpins in destroying humanity for profit through drug trafficking. The following families, besides others, or individuals from these families are mentioned in Dope Incorporated as involved in some aspect of the drug trade. Astors, Bundys, DuPonts, Freemans, Kennedys, Lees, Rockefellers, Rothschilds, Russ. It is no coincidence that 9 of the top 13 families would get their names in a book which revealed the big names behind the world's illegal narcotics trade. It should be mentioned that some other prominent Illuminati families also play key roles in the drug trade, such as the Bronfmans, Cabots, Shaws, Bacons, Perkins, Morgan, Forbes, Cisneros, and Oppenheimers. Where have we seen such names before? There are names in Dope Incorporated that people would do well to know the danger of, such as Louis Mortimer Bloomfield, Robert Vesco, François Genoud of Switzerland, Ivan Slavkov of Bulgaria, the Duke of Kent, Master of the Grand Mother Lodge of the Scottish Rite, and Jardine Matheson, to mention a few. All our favorite secret fraternal groups appear in Dope Incorporated too. For instance, the Triads, P2 Masonry, regular Freemasonry, the CIA, the Order of St. John, and the Jesuits. The Universal Christian Gnostic Churches, which practices black magic, has a whole chapter showing its connection to the drug trade. Britain's Assassination Bureau Permindex, which has been mentioned previously in this newsletter, also gets a chapter in the book. In the Be Wise as Serpents book, I examine in detail only the Rothschilds and the Russ. I did not present much to back up my statements about the 13 families. Further, one of the unthinkable items that most people do not want to consider is that their leaders who they have idolized may be utterly corrupt. There was nothing to do but sit down and give the nitty-gritty details if the threat from the Illuminati was to be properly understood. The facts would speak for themselves. The ideal solution for both writer and reader was for me to write up my research and for you to read it as a series of articles. There is only so much a person can assimilate at once, and these articles give lots of details. In January of this year I began a series of articles on the top 13 families which the top experts said nobody knew about. I did this with the hope of stimulating others to notice these families, and to alert a wider sector of the body of Christ. The young colleague David J. Smith, who wrote part of the January 1st article on the Illuminati, was led to carry out further research in addition to what the January 1st article had. Most of this article's information on the Astors then is a result of David's research. Difficulty in determining the facts. Most of the material put out on the Astor shows the unmistakable mark of distortion by writers and historians giving information in line with what the Astors wanted the public to get. Books on the Astors contain both believable and unbelievable material, fact and fiction. Some of the real facts may remain obscured forever, but that has not stopped us from getting the most accurate picture we could reconstruct. The Astors do not make the task of investigating them easy. They have been very secret and very deceptive since they arrived in this nation. John Jacob Astor, the first prominent Astor, was a notorious liar. He was known on occasion to invent romantic tales for the edification of people who annoyed him with questions. Men who knew him best were, therefore, neither ready to discredit completely all legends about his exploits nor to repeat them as gospel. The truth, they suspected, lay somewhere between the two extremes. Terrell, John Upton. Furs by Astor, p. 102. John Jacob's son ensured that his father's lies would go unchallenged by incinerating all of his personal records, business records and other papers. Origin of the family and its name. The Astors have come up with various origins for themselves, and those for or against the family have added more ideas. One strong possibility is that the Astors are descendants of the Astorga family found in southern Italy before the 1600s. The most likely meaning of the name is that both Astorga and Astor are variations meaning Astarte, who is the mother of the occult. Her name is also Semiramis. In Babylon the Trinity was Nimrod, the sun, Semiramis, the moon, and Tammuz, the morning star. In Egypt, these gods were called Osiris, Isis, and Horus. The pictures and statues Isis and Horus were renamed by the Roman Catholic Church as the Virgin Mary and the Christ Child. The family in Europe. The family may have moved from Savoy to Waldorf, Germany. Although it is not a certainty, the best explanation from the available clues indicates that Waldorf's coven had some important personages in the witchcraft/satanic system, and that Johann Astor's family had power. At that time in Europe, the Astor family had no chance to turn their occult power into success. The power and class structure in Europe was rigid and gridlocked. The boundaries between peasant and aristocracy were solidly in place. So the family looked to the New World to transmute their position in the satanic hierarchy into financial wealth and power. Johann Astor in Waldorf was only a butcher. His best son John Jacob, 1763–1848, was selected to establish the House of Astor in America. John Jacob Astor goes to America. At age 16, John Jacob Astor quit helping the family butcher business, went to England and then later to America. Looking at the details of things, and piecing the truth together, it appears that his satanic authority was already in place, because he was able to travel to England, and as a German-speaking peasant converse face-to-face with the Backhouse family in England. Of course the biographers make it sound like John Jacob Astor left Germany for himself, rather than his family. Michael Astor gives a glimpse of John Jacob's mission. He concentrated almost entirely on building a fortune, on escaping the poverty of his childhood and establishing a secure financial position for his family in America. Astor, Michael. Tribal Feeling p. 11. Overview. The process of 400 years looks like this. Various satanic families moved into the southwest German area in the late medieval time period. Witchcraft associated with Diana was practiced in southwest Germany, and this began to alarm various elements of the Roman Catholic Church. Roman Catholicism is witchcraft, the complete evidence. The Astor family provides leadership in the covens in the Heidelberg area. Witchcraft spread virtually all over southwest Germany. An examination of the old records from about 1500 to 1650 show that witchcraft was being practiced throughout the area. I have the names of over 120 towns where it was practiced in SW Germany, the list derived from old German records. The Astors did not have the position, wealth, and power that accorded their position in the late 1700s of occult leadership. In Germany, England and France there was no way to climb the social ladder. However, the New World presented opportunities. The Astor sent two sons to prepare the way for John Jacob, one to England, one to America, and then sent John Jacob, their most promising brightest son, to the New World. While in America, the Astor family helped the satanic elite headquartered in England to maintain its control over America. Having come from Germany, and also due to Satanism being secret, John Jacob Astor's help given to pro-British elite moves were more difficult to suspect. After establishing themselves as aristocrats in America, the tribe of Astors moved to England, where because of their high social position in America, no one questioned the Queen bestowing titles of nobility on them. All along the process, people with Illuminati connections opened doors for the Astors. At this point, it needs to be pointed out that there were ties between the following groups: English royalty, English Satanism, English Freemasonry, and German witchcraft, and the Italian black nobility. Taking the liberty I have as author of this article, I am going to digress to give some examples of these connections. Although on the surface this doesn't directly pertain to the Astors, it does. When one paints in the bigger panorama of what was happening in the occult world, and then one sees a blazing star streak across that panorama, then the real history of that blazing star is given by tracking its voyage through that panorama. However, the history books have intentionally hidden the significance of so many of the players and groups that lay along the track of that blazing streak. Specific groups. Order of the Knights of the Helmet. This was an illuminated secret society with Sir Francis Bacon at its head. In order to hide its Masonic rituals, Sir Francis Bacon wrote a play entitled The Order of the Helmet. This was performed in January 3, 1594, and again for 12 days in December 1594. In December 1594, British aristocrats who had been demonically illuminated, met and put on a play. Calling their initiation ceremony a play was a great cover. Sir Francis Bacon was made King and Prince of Purple. Various men were invested with the collar of knighthood of the helmet, and took vows, and a series of charges by 6 high counselors was given in a manner that is very similar to what the Satanic SRIA does now. The reader may ask, what does this have to do with the Astors? This is simply a few brief look at the background of what was happening in the occult in Europe. The Queen of England sent Sir Francis Bacon as a young man in his 20s to the continent of Europe. Sir Francis Bacon toured France in places such as Louvre, St. Cloud, Blois, Paris, and Poitiers. He also traveled to Germany, Italy, and Spain. He visited the various royal courts, such as the court of Marguerite de Valois. Marguerite was married to King Henry of Navarre. Her mother was the evil Catherine de Medicis. Sir Francis Bacon also met with many secret societies. At Marguerite's court he spent time with the Plaid Fraternity, which was a group of 7 intellectuals. According to the best biographer of Sir Francis Bacon, who was Alfred Dodd, Alfred spent his entire life studying Sir Francis Bacon. Sir Francis Bacon was initiated into a large number of secret occult societies when he was on the continent of Europe. He learned Kabbalistic magic, Egyptian mysticism, Arabian mysticism, and the customs of the German Steinmetzen. Dodd, Alfred. Francis Bacon's Life Story. London, Ryder & Co., 1988, p. 10.4. This information has been provided to give some feel for how the occult in Europe was in contact with its various parts, and that its tentacles included many of the royal families. Hellfire Club. This was a secret satanic cult which was associated with early Freemasonry. When the connections became known between the Satanists of the Hellfire Club and the elite of Freemasonry, Freemasonry and the elite made some radical moves. First, Freemasonry publicly proclaimed that it had nothing to do with the Hellfire Club. When the Hellfire Club was publicly disbanded by the government, acting on orders from people that tied in with the club. Later, quietly the club was reconstituted. Philip, at Duke of Wharton, 1698–1731, who was the second person of nobility to be Grand Master of England's Freemasons, GM of the Grand Lodge 6/1722/11/25/1723, was president of the Hellfire Club. He was an M.P. in the House of Lords. In 1726, he left England and was basically brought into ill repute by the Masons, who distanced themselves from him. George Lee, Earl of Lichfield, was also another prominent Mason who was a member of the Hellfire Club. Benjamin Franklin, who was the head of the American Freemasons in various capacities, and also the head of the Rosicrucians and a number of other secret occult groups, was also a member of the Hellfire Club. Benjamin Franklin's Satanism was not mentioned in My Be Wise as Serpent's book, but he was an important Satanist who was part of the Order of the Quest. That is the group which has been entrusted with the plans for bringing in the New World Order of Satan. Remember that John Jacob Astor was very involved with Freemasonry, as were a number of his intimate friends such as NY Governor DeWitt Clinton and General John A. Armstrong. In regards to the Hellfire Club, the Earl of Sandwich, Benjamin Franklin and Sir Francis Dashwood were leaders in the Hellfire Club and were also Postmaster Generals of the British Postal Service. All were Freemasons too. Their positions as Postmaster Generals allowed them total access to the mail, and allowed them to spy on the communications of the 18th century. The man who became Postmaster General after Wood, who moved on to be a M.P. in the B.R. Parliament, was the Mason John Wilkes. John Wilkes took over in 1766, in 1774 was Lord Mayor of London. Wilkes then brought one of the original Hellfire Club members, a friend of his Willis Hill, to help with the postal service. The next Postmaster General was the totally corrupt man, the Earl of Sandwich, who served until 1771. Benjamin Franklin spent the summers of 1772, 1773, and 1774 at Dashwood's estate in West Wickham. The caves under Dashwood's estate at West Wickham were used for satanic sexual rituals, which were participated in by Benjamin Franklin. Ordo Saturnus. This is an old secret satanic German order. In the last few newsletters, I have been educating people on the meaning of Saturn. It means Satan. This previous information helps us understand John Jacob Astor when he writes in his book A Journey in Other Worlds. The souls of the righteous departed were found on Saturn, where, to a background of weird music, pulsating hearts, luminous brains and centers of spiritual activity quiver with motion. A side comment, John Jacob Astor had a reputation for his insatiable sexual lust to Paul women. One of the people we have to investigate in relation to the Ordo Saturnus is Valentine June, who was John Jacob Astor's mentor in Waldorf, Germany. June may well have belonged to an organization such as Ordo Saturnus. John Jacob Astor leaves Germany for England and America. John Jacob Astor arrived in England and may well have been introduced in England to British intelligence by his brother George. At any rate, he got involved in British intelligence, which has always been closely linked to Freemasonry and the elite. He spent time socially with the Backhouse family, which an aristocratic family. How do you suppose such a supposedly destitute young man could be accepted so easily into the Backhouse social scene? This is not explained by modern biographers. After 4 years, his brother George then sent him to America to represent George's music company. His brother Henry met him when he arrived in 1784 at age 20 and introduced him to the occult world in New York City. Thomas Backhouse and Company was a leading house in the lucrative fur trade. John Jacob Astor set out to bring the fur trade under his own control. There is a tact that must be faced. The Elites Committee of 300, a secret legislative group of the Illuminati, decided that John Jacob Astor could expand into the fur trade and into the opium narcotics trade. Dope Incorporated shows that the Astor family was the first American family to get into the opium trade, and that their opium trade was a special privilege that most other American businesses did not even try to compete with. Why? Dope Incorporated doesn't say this, but I know that it is because the Committee of 300 decides such things, not free enterprise. American furs yielded 1,000% profit in those days. The privilege of fur trading was a pot of gold, so to speak, that the Committee of 300 gave Astor, and it could only have happened because the Astor family in Waldorf was already part of a principal satanic bloodline. The Illuminati members of the Astor family today use their influence to help those of the Illuminati in their dope trade. William Backhouse, the American representative of the London Backhouse family, and John Jacob's brother Henry were two of John Jacob's initial contacts in the New World. Soon John Jacob had met all types of people involved in New York's occult world. John Jacob married Sarah Todd. John Jacob's stepmother Christina Barbara is described as the perfect, cruel fairy tale stepmother. John Jacob raised the principle of self-interest to the level of a philosophy and claimed for himself a natural superiority over his less able and less powerful fellow men, a sort of God-given right to exploit the world and its inhabitants for his personal gain. This was not mere cynicism, but a genuine belief that in some way, he was among the chosen people for whose convenience and advancement life was ordered. Such people make history, but they also pervert it in human terms because their world and the codes that govern it have nothing to do with morality. Sinclair, David. Dynasty: The Astors and Their Times. p. 59. Astor took Freemasonry seriously. Governor DeWitt Clinton rose unusually fast in the degrees, but the German immigrant, John Jacob, who talked at times as if he had marbles in his mouth, was not far behind him. Astor eventually caught up to Clinton. Terrell. Furs by Astor, p. 84. DeWitt Clinton's uncle George Clinton, who served as Jefferson's vice president, was also a member of their Holland Lodge No. 8. Archibald Russell of the Russell family, as well as 2 members of the elite Livingston family, were members of this lodge too at the time. The Livingston family were participating in the Committee of 300 at that time. One of my Masonic reference books states that business at the Holland Lodge No. 8 was conducted in German. If so, why were all these other men involved with it who apparently had English as their mother tongue? In the January 1, 1993 issue, Astor's dirty real estate deals and his activity as a drug kingpin were discussed. However, Astor's connivance to create a nation on the West Coast wasn't. Thomas Jefferson, who I have now come to realize was a part of the Illuminati, was in on the plot. Jefferson said that he hoped for the establishment of an independent nation on the Pacific Coast, bound to the United States by ties of blood, language, and friendship. The Northwest was to become a sovereign nation under Astor's rule. The plan failed miserably due to a variety of reasons. Another item that was missed in the earlier article was how John Jacob Astor profited by using his own courier system and powerful friends to profit from the War of 1812. Astor knew the War of 1812 was coming and he set himself up to profit from it in several ways. His Masonic brother and friend John A. Armstrong 1758–1843 helped the British war effort as the American Secretary of War. A descendant of John's later married into the Astors. Astor himself helped the British when he could profit by it. The 2 Illuminati Jefferson and Gallatin gave Astor special sailing privileges which netted him much profit. When war was declared against Great Britain, Astor sent agents to the British forts in Canada to inform them. This gave the British advance knowledge of the war, before the Americans' troops knew. This allowed the British to seize northern American forts and to ensure that the British had control of the region's fur trade. This was essential for Astor to get control of the fur market, because then when the British furs were embargoed he had less competition. He obtained special permission from the president to import all furs owned by him and held in Canada before the war. He used TH's permission illegally to trap new furs. When the war ended, Astor was able to heat everyone else to Europe with his furs and make a killing. Astor cleared his name of shame by sending Washington, D.C. information about a mutiny at a British fort which allowed the U.S. Army to take advantage of the enemy's weak condition to capture the area. John Jacob Astor traded in guns, and his firearms were used in at least one Latin American revolution. Bear in mind Latin American revolutions have all been planned in Masonic lodges. When employees of John Jacob Astor would trap for or trade furs with the Astor fur houses, they would be paid with letters of credit. Then Astor agents would be sent out to ambush and kill them, so that the Astor Fur Company could save money. The deaths were blamed on Indians. Zachary Taylor stated, "Take the American Fur Company in the aggregate, and they are the greatest scoundrels the world ever knew." O'Connor, The Astors p.44. William Backhouse Astor. This was the son of John Jacob Astor. He was infamous for his hank treatment of thousands of people who rented from him in New York. There were repealed riots by tenants who were opposed by the harsh filthy living conditions in the buildings Astor owned, but their complaints were consistently ignored by Astor and their riots suppressed by the police. Only half of the children of his tenants lived to age 20. The Astors were deeply involved with the Tammany organization. William B. supported the corrupt administration of the infamous New York mayor, Fernando Wood. The government at that time was a pack of corrupt men. When Wood was exposed, Astor's involvement was overlooked. This is another example of Astor power. John Jacob III. He was the son of William Backhouse Astor. He was just as haughty, just as cruel, and just as corrupt as his father and grandfather had been. He created sweatshops for the poor masses living in his New York tenements. He also supported corrupt politicians such as the criminal boss Tweed who ran NYC. The Tweed ring stole millions of dollars from the city of New York. Before they finally got caught and sent to prison, Mayor Tweed and gang cost the city $200 million. Again, John Jacob Astor III's power allowed his involvement to be basically overlooked by the press, while Tweed went to prison for life. The Chandler branch. Most of the Astors took off for England, but one branch of the Astors that is clearly involved in Satanism and the occult is the Chandler family. The Chandler family have Astor blood via Matey Astor Ward. The Chandlers' parents died at an early age, and the Rokeby estate in NY was given by the Astors so that a cousin Mary Marshall could raise the Chandler children. The Chandler family is one branch that clearly shows all the earmarks of the Satanic hierarchy. The behavior of Robert Chandler, Elizabeth Chandler and Armstrong Chandler have all the classic earmarks of having MPD, and having suffered SRA. The Rokeby mansion that the Chandler family lived in was a haunted house of the first rate. Fairies, ghosts, signs and potents, and all type of occult activity takes place at this mansion. When top RX Illuminati members who have managed to escape Satanism describe their home life, they mention that occult phenomena was a natural part of home life. This certainly is what life has been like at the Chandler Rokeby mansion. The Chainers are not well known publicly but have been part of the social scene of the elite. Theodore Roosevelt and Senator Henry Cabot Lodge, of the elite Cabot family, were good friends of the Chandlers. The Chandlers created the town Roanoke Rapids, North Carolina. At some point I hope to do an expose on the resort area in that general area that is a meat market for the Illuminati. Families like the Bill Clintons go down there every year for vacation to mingle with other middle management families that the Illuminati use as lackeys. Illuminati scouts watch and choose who they want to use for political office, etc. A who's who of the Astor orphans, the Chenier family who are of interest to our study of the Illuminati, will now be given. John Armstrong Chandler married mystic novelist and morphine addict Amelia Rives. Once wandering in the twilight she asked wistfully, "Do you think if I drank a whole cupful of warm, bubbly blood, I would see a real fairy?" Then there had been the period during which she suffered anguish over the thought that Satan was banished from paradise forever. She prayed with tears that ultimately he might be pardoned and readmitted to celestial bliss. Thomas, lately. The Astor Orphans, a Pride of Lions p. 76. John carried on spiritual experiments in what he termed esoteric Buddhism. Due to his obsession with this practice and a business fight with his brothers, they put him in an insane asylum. He finally did get released. One has to wonder what the whole story was behind the incarceration. His esoteric Buddhism or X faculty was a trance state where a spirit spoke or did automatic writing through him. His eye color would change when this spirit worked through him. Margaret Livingston Chandler retained the rights to Rokeby. She married into the Aldrich family, which is another Illuminati family. The Irish is now on Rokeby. William Chandler was a friend of Tom Foley, who was the Tammany district leader of the Irish Italian district east of City Hall. Another friend was Jack Follansbee. Jack Follansbee's cousin was William Randolph Hearst, an Illuminatus of the 6 Degrees who got Billy Graham's ministry going by financing the first several years. The Hearst family is in the Illuminati. One of the Rothschild descendants, Don Hearst Bauer, has changed his name to Don Hearst. Winthrop Chandler's wife, Amelia Rive, her father William Cabell Rives studied law under Thomas Jefferson. The Roosevelt connection. The Roosevelt family has been connected to the Delano family, which is a black Venetian noble family that goes back for many centuries. The lives of these families also intertwine with the Astors. Examples of the interweaving are Franklin Hughes Delano, heir to a massive whale oil fortune. He married Lavia Astor, daughter of the original William Backhouse Astor. James Roosevelt married Helen Astor, daughter of William Backhouse Jr. James Roosevelt, a Freemason, he married the sister of Vincent Astor's wife. Summary. In our revisit to the Astors, we have examined in more detail the early life of John Jacob Astor and his connections to Satanism. We have touched on his son and grandson who led the Astor family after John Jacob died. We have seen more of their meanness and connections to corruption. We examined both Satanism and the occult had a hold on England even back when John Jacob Astor came to the New World. 3 important occult organizations of the 17th and 18th century were introduced. We have looked at the Chandler family, a branch of the Astor family which is part of Satanism. We also looked at how the Roosevelts and Delano families have been associated with the Astors.
Please like us and share with your social media.
Please subscribe and click the bell to be notified of our new videos.
Remember to check out our playlist for important intel you may have missed.
Be sure to enter our subscriber appreciation $100 monthly giveaway. The link is in our description.
And visit our sister channel. Event is coming soon. For additional intel and information, stay tuned. Victory of the Light.